The boy on the bicycle saw them first. He was 11 years old, pedaling home from a friend's house on a cold November evening, and he saw the old woman in the passenger seat of a dusty Ford Taurus, her face pressed against the glass like she was watching a movie she couldn't turn away from. She was looking at the house across the street, the house with the yellow door, the house with the swing set still standing in the backyard even though no children had lived there in 30 years. The boy stopped. He stood on the pedals. He looked at the car, then at the house, then back at the car. The old woman didn't notice him. She just kept staring. The old man behind the wheel had both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, even though the engine was off, even though the car hadn't moved in hours. The boy's mother called his name from their porch. He pedaled away. But he told her at dinner what he'd seen. She told his father. His father told the neighbor. And by morning, everyone on the street knew that Josephine and Bernard, who had built that house with their own hands in 1978, were living in their car 40 feet from the front door they no longer had a key to. The first thing you need to understand about Josephine is that she never raised her voice. Not once. Not when the coffee pot broke on a Monday morning. Not when Bernard forgot their anniversary in 1993. Not when she found out her daughter had been skipping school in the 10th grade. She would just go quiet. She would press her lips together until they turned white, and she would wait. She believed, with the kind of faith that can only come from a woman who has survived 52 years of marriage, that silence was stronger than screaming, that patience was a weapon. That eventually, the world would right itself if you just held still long enough. She was 70 years old. Her hair was the color of old silver, pulled back in a bun she'd worn the same way since 1965. She had worked as a bank teller for 34 years at the same branch in the same town, processing deposits and withdrawals and loan payments for people she'd known since grade school. She knew everyone's name. She knew their children's names. She knew which husbands had gambling problems and which wives were saving secretly to leave them. She kept their secrets in a locked drawer behind her eyes and never told a soul. Her relic was a tin of lemon drops. It sat in the pocket of her cardigan at all times. A small silver tin, worn smooth at the edges from 30 years of fingers reaching into it. She had kept it in her teller window from 1988 until the day she retired in 2018. The children who came in with their parents would get a lemon drop if they were patient. The old men who came in alone on Fridays would get one too, slipped across the counter like a secret. It was her way of saying, "I see you, I remember you, you matter." She still had it. She still offered one to Bernard when he looked like he needed it. He always took it. He always said thank you. Bernard was the opposite of Josephine in every way that mattered. He was loud. He was built like a refrigerator, even at 75, with shoulders that had carried steel pipes up scaffolding for 40 years and hands that had never learned how to be gentle. He had a temper that flared hot and burned out fast, like newspaper in a fireplace. He had said things he regretted. He had apologized for most of them. He had meant every apology. He was a pipe fitter, union man, local 469. He joined in 1971 when he was 23 years old, and he carried that union card in his wallet every single day for the next 52 years. It was the first thing he'd touch in the morning and the last thing he'd check at night. That card meant something. It meant he had a skill. It meant he could provide. It meant that when his wife needed surgery in 2004, he had insurance. When his kids needed braces, he could pay. When the roof needed replacing in 1997, he bought the shingles with cash. He built the house himself, the one with the yellow door. The one they were now parked in front of. He poured the foundation in September in 78. He framed the walls in October. He ran the plumbing in November, sweating copper joints by flashlight because the power wasn't connected yet. He built the kitchen cabinets from pine boards he'd milled himself. He hung every door, laid every tile, planted every tree in the front yard. The maple tree that now stood 30 feet tall. He planted it when it was a stick with roots. He'd carried it home in the back of his pickup truck, wrapped in burlap, and Josephine had laughed at him because it looked like a dead twig. "Give it time," he said. She gave it time. So did he. The house had 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a basement that flooded every spring. It had drafty windows and a furnace that made strange noises at night. It had a porch swing that Bernard had hung and rehung 3 times because Josephine said it wasn't level. It had her garden in the back, the one with the roses she'd grown from cuttings given to her by her mother, who had died in 1989. It had the scratch marks on the kitchen floor from their dog, Rusty, who had died in 2002. It had everything that mattered, and now they were watching it from a car. The children were 3, 2 sons, 1 daughter, all in their 40s, all with families of their own. all with homes they hadn't built, mortgages they hadn't earned, and a sense of entitlement that Bernard could not understand no matter how many times he turned it over in his mind. David was the oldest, 47. He was a regional manager for a hardware supply company. He wore suits that cost more than Bernard's first car. He drove a black SUV with leather seats and heated steering wheel. He had a wife named Cynthia who had never once cooked a meal for them, a daughter in private school, and a house with a pool. Michael was the middle child, 44. He was a contractor, which Bernard had been proud of until he realized Michael had never actually worked with his hands. He subcontracted everything. He drove a white pickup truck that was always clean. He had a gambling problem that no one talked about and a wife who cried at family dinners. Katherine was the youngest, 42. She was a real estate agent. She had been the favorite, and that made the betrayal cut deeper. She had her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness, and she had used both to convince them that they needed to sign the papers. "It's just a reverse mortgage," she had said. "It's a financial product. It's perfectly safe." Thousands of people do it. They signed on a Tuesday in November. The same Tuesday they were now living through 11 days later in a car that smelled like old coffee and despair. The betrayal happened slowly, the way a door closes when someone is standing on the other side of the hinges. It started with a conversation at Catherine's kitchen table. A plate of cookies that Josephine had baked, a pot of coffee that Bernard had made because he couldn't sit still and needed something to do with his hands. Katherine had spread papers across the table. Glossy brochures. A folder with their names on it. A pen that she placed in front of them like an offering. "Mom, Dad, I need you to trust me." They trusted her. Of course they trusted her. She was their daughter. She was the one who called every Sunday. She was the one who remembered their anniversary. She was the one who cried at her brother's wedding because she was happy, and she was the one who cried at her own because she was overwhelmed. They had held her when she was born. They had taught her how to ride a bike. They had paid for her college, her wedding, her down payment on the house she now lived in. They signed. The first sign that something was wrong came 3 months later. A letter from the bank. The reverse mortgage had been accelerated. The terms had changed. There was a balloon payment due. They didn't understand it. They called Katherine. She didn't answer. They called David. He said he'd look into it. They called Michael. He said he was busy. The balloon payment was $180,000. They had $180 in their savings account. They lost the house on a Tuesday in November. The sheriff came at 8 a.m. He was polite. He had done this before. He stood on the porch Bernard had built with his own hands, and he handed them a notice of eviction. They had 72 hours to vacate. The house would be sold at auction. The proceeds would go to the bank. They would get nothing. Josephine packed 2 bags, one with clothes, one with photographs. She put the lemon drops in her pocket. Bernard put his wallet in his back pocket. He touched the union card. He felt the worn edges. He felt the same thing he had felt when he was 23 and walking into his first job, the certainty that he could handle whatever came next. That certainty lasted until they walked out the door and it locked behind them. The children were not there. None of them. Katherine had sent a text message. "I'm sorry. I didn't think it would happen this way." Bernard did not reply that nowhere to go. No family who would take them. No friends who had room. They had a 2003 Ford Taurus with 187,000 miles on it and a half tank of gas. They had 2 bags. They had each other. They drove down the street and parked. That was 11 days ago. The dashboard clock read 2:14 a.m. Bernard was awake. He had been awake for hours. His arthritis was bad. The cold made it worse. He could feel it in his knees, his hips, the fingers of his left hand that had been crushed in a pipe accident in 1987 and never fully healed. He looked at the house. The lights were on in the kitchen. Someone was inside. He didn't know who. The house had been sold at auction 3 days ago. The new owners hadn't moved in yet. Maybe it was a realtor. Maybe it was a cleaner. Maybe it was nobody. He watched the light. He remembered painting that kitchen. He remembered choosing the color, a pale yellow that Josephine said reminded her of buttercups. He remembered the argument they'd had about whether to use eggshell or satin finish. She wanted eggshell. He wanted satin. They compromised on eggshell because she was right, and he knew it, and he had learned over 52 years that she was right about most things. The light went out. The house went dark. Bernard looked at Josephine. She was asleep. Her head was tilted against the passenger window. Her mouth was slightly open. She looked older than she had 3 months ago. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who had been carrying something heavy for too long. He reached into the glove box to find a tissue. He had a cold. His nose was running. He didn't want to wake her by sniffling. The glove box was full of old papers, registration, insurance. a map of the state from 2006, a receipt from a diner they'd stopped at in 2012, a book of matches from a motel they'd stayed in during a to the mountains in 1999. He pushed them aside. His fingers touched something stiff, an envelope. Old. He pulled it out. The envelope was addressed to him, 742 Maple Street, the house they just lost. The postmark was from 1981. He opened it. Inside was a property tax receipt. A single piece of paper, thin and fragile, with the town seal stamped at the top. He read it once. He read it again. His hands started shaking. The receipt was for a property. A lot. A piece of land. Lot 17 Pine Ridge Road. They had bought it in 1981 for $2,200. He remembered now. He remembered the day. He had seen the listing in the newspaper. A small lot, wooded, no utilities, no road access. He had bought it on a whim. He had put it in both their names. He had forgotten about it. Completely. Absolutely. For 42 years, he looked at Josephine. She was still asleep. He looked at the receipt again. He calculated. He had heard about Pine Ridge Road. It had been rezoned. The town had grown. The land out there was worth something now. Maybe a lot. Maybe enough. He turned on the dome light, just for a second, just to see the date. The date was April 14, 1981. He turned off the light. He sat in the dark. He held the receipt in his hands like it was made of glass. He did not wake Josephine. Not yet. He needed to be sure. He needed to think. He needed to wait until morning, until the county assessor's office opened, until he could make a phone call. But something had shifted. Something had changed. For the first time in 11 days, the cold did not feel quite so cold. The cold returned by morning. It seeped through the floorboards of the motel room, through the thin blanket Bernard had pulled over his shoulders, through the bones of his left hand, which effed in a way that told him rain was coming. He had not slept. He had sat in the chair by the window, the receipt folded and refolded in his pocket until the creases were soft as cloth, and he had waited for the sun. Josephine woke at 6. She did not ask why he was already dressed. She did not ask why his hands were shaking. She just looked at him, and he saw something in her eyes that he had not seen in months, a kind of cautious hope, like a bird testing a branch after a storm. "You found something," she said. It was not a question. He told her about the lot. He told her about 1981, about the whim, about the forgetting. He told her what he had calculated in the dark. Pine Ridge Road was 5 miles from the new tech corridor. The county had rezoned it for commercial development 3 years ago. A lot that had cost $2,000 might now be worth $200,000, maybe more. Josephine did not cry. She just nodded, slow and steady, and then she said the thing that Bernard had been thinking but had not dared to voice. "You need to go alone. They don't know about this." "Nobody knows. Keep it that way." He drove her to her sister's house in the next town over. Margaret was not warm, but she was reliable, and she had a guest room that faced south and got good light. Josephine stood on the porch with her small suitcase and looked at Bernard for a long moment. She touched his face. Her fingers were cold. "Come back," she said. "I will." She did not say, "I love you." She did not need to. He drove to the county assessor's office. The building was low and gray, the kind of government architecture that seemed designed to drain the color out of hope. He waited in a plastic chair for 45 minutes. He watched a clock on the wall tick forward 1 minute at a time. He thought about the envelope and the receipt and the years he had spent not knowing that he owned something that could save them. A clerk called his name. She was young, maybe 25, with a nose ring and glasses shaped like cat's eyes. She did not seem impressed by him. She did not seem impressed by anything. He showed her the receipt. She took it, turned it over, looked at the date, looked at the lot number. She typed something into her computer. She waited. She typed again. Then her face changed. "Lot 17 Pine Ridge Road," she said. "You're Bernard Holloway?" "Yes." She looked at him differently now. "You know what that lot is worth?" "I have an idea." She printed out a document. She handed it to him. He read it twice, the same way he had read the receipt, slowly, carefully, as if the words might rearrange themselves if he blinked. The assessed value was $340,000. The back taxes were $4,700. He could pay the back taxes. He had $5,000 in savings. He had been holding it for emergencies. This was an emergency. This was the emergency. He paid them that afternoon. He walked out of the office with a certified copy of the deed and a clear title in his name. He sat in his truck for 10 minutes, just breathing. Then he called the number for a real estate agent that he had found in the yellow pages at the motel. 2 days later, he had an offer. 3 days later, he had a contract. 4 days later, he had a check. $420,000, minus commissions and fees. $371,842.16. He deposited into a new account at a different bank. He did not tell anyone. He did not call David. He did not call the bank that had foreclosed on his house. He waited. He drove back to Margaret's house. He picked up Josephine. They drove to a diner on the highway, the kind with sticky menus and coffee that tasted like regret. They sat in a booth by the window. Bernard ordered eggs. Josephine ordered toast. They did not talk about the money. They talked about the rain, about Margaret's cats, about the way it looked different now that the days were getting longer. Then Bernard said, "I want to buy a house." Josephine put down her toast. "Where?" "Not here. Somewhere else. Somewhere we haven't been." She thought about it. She picked up her toast again. She took a bite. She chewed slowly, deliberately, the way she chewed everything, as if she were testing it for poison. "The coast?" she said. "I've always wanted to see the coast." He nodded. He had never seen the coast either. They had been too busy. They had been too poor. They had been too afraid to leave. They drove home to Margaret's house, and Bernard spent the evening on the internet, looking at houses in a small town on the coast, 300 miles away. He found one. A cottage, 2 bedrooms, a porch. A yard with a tree that might have been an apple tree. The price was reasonable. The pictures showed a kitchen with pale yellow walls. He called the agent the next morning. He made an offer. It was accepted. He did not tell David. David called on a Tuesday. Bernard was packing. The cottage had closed 3 days ago. He and Josephine were leaving at the end of the week. He had a rental truck reserved. He had boxes. He had hope, which was the heaviest thing of all. The phone rang. He looked at the screen. David. He let it ring. It rang again. Josephine looked at him from across the room, where she was wrapping a ceramic bowl in newspaper. "Are you going to answer?" "No. It might be important." "It's always important. That's his problem. Everything is important. Nothing is urgent." She set down the bowl. She came over to him. She put her hand on his arm. "Bernard, answer the phone." He answered. "Dad." David's voice was different. It was not the voice he had used at the auction. It was not the voice he had used when he talked about the equity and the interest rates and the smart financial decision. It was smaller. It was thinner. It was afraid. "David, I need to talk to you. You're talking." There was a pause. Bernard heard something in the background. A woman's voice, sharp, angry. Then David's voice again, lower, almost a whisper. "I need money." Bernard closed his eyes. He had known this was coming. He had felt it in his bones, the same way he felt rain in his left hand. He had hoped it would not come. He had known it would. What happened? Melanie left. She took the kids. She took everything. She found out about the house. She found out about the trust. She said, his voice cracked. She said I was a liar. She said I was a thief. Bernard said nothing. "Please. I need help. I don't have anywhere to go." She cleaned out the accounts. She took the car. "I'm sleeping in my office. I haven't eaten in 2 days." Bernard looked at Josephine. She was watching him. Her face was still. She did not know what David had said, but she knew. She always knew. "I can't help you," Bernard said. "Dad, I can't help you, David. I don't have anything to give. You have the lot. I know about the lot. I found the receipt. I went to the assessor's office. You sold it. You got $400,000. Bernard felt the air leave the room. He had been careful. He had been so careful. He had used a different bank. He had paid cash for the cottage. He had told no one. "How did you find out?" "I have a friend at the county. She called me. She said my father came with a receipt from 1981. She thought I knew. She thought." David stopped. His voice broke again. "Dad, you don't understand. I'm in trouble. Real trouble. Melanie is talking to a lawyer. She's going to take everything. She's going to take my license. She's going to... You should have thought of that before you stole my house." The words came out flat. They came out clean. They came out without anger, which was worse than anger. They came out like a verdict. David was silent. "I'm sorry," he said. "It was small. It was late. It was not enough. Goodbye, David." "Dad, wait." Bernard hung up. He stood in the living room, the phone still in his hand, the silence pressing in around him. Josephine came to him. She did not say anything. She just stood beside him, her shoulder touching his, her breath warm in the cold room. "He knows about the money," Bernard said. "Of course he does. He's always known how to find things that don't belong to him." "What do I do?" Josephine took the phone from his hand. She set it on the table. She took his hand, the one that ached, the one that had never healed right, and she held it between both of hers. "You've already done it?" she said. "You said no. You said goodbye. That's all you had to do. He's my son. He made himself your enemy. That was his choice. You get to choose too." Bernard looked at her. She was old. She was tired. She was the only person in the world who had ever looked at him and seen something worth staying for. "I choose you," he said. She smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was a tired smile, a weathered smile, a smile that had been through too many winters. But it was real. Good, she said. Now help me finish packing. They left on a Friday. The rental truck was small and old, but it ran. Bernard drove. Josephine sat beside him with a map on her lap. Even though she had a phone with GPS, because she liked the feel of paper, they drove through the town where they had lived for 52 years. They drove past the house on Maple Street. The lights were off. The for sale sign was gone. A new sign stood in its place, smaller, with the words SOLD printed across the top. Bernard did not stop. He did not slow down. He just drove. The cottage was on a street called Seaview Lane, which was an optimistic name for a street that only saw the ocean from a single point at the end of the block. But the ocean was there. He could smell it when he stepped out of the truck. He could taste it in the air, salt and something green and alive. Josephine stood on the porch. She was wearing her good coat, the one she had saved for special occasions which she had not had in years. The wind caught her hair, gray and thin, and lifted off her face. "It's small," she said. "It's ours." She looked at him. She looked at the house. She looked at the tree in the yard, which was not an apple tree but a pear tree, heavy with white blossoms. "It's ours," she repeated. They moved in that afternoon. The furniture came out of the truck and into the rooms. The boxes came out of the furniture. The dishes came out of the boxes. By evening, the cottage was a home. It was not perfect. The kitchen counter was cracked. The bathroom sink dripped. The back door stuck in the frame when it rained. But it was theirs. Bernard sat on the porch at sunset. He had a glass of water. He had his coat on. The air was cold, but it was a different cold, a clean cold, a cold that did not feel like it was trying to kill him. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. A text message from an unknown number. He opened it. "Dad, I'm in treatment. I've been diagnosed. The doctor says it's related to stress. I've lost everything. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I know what I did. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the house. I'm sorry for everything. You don't have to respond. I just needed to say it. David." Bernard read it 3 times. He did not respond. He set the phone down. He looked at the sky. The sun was going down slow and red, bleeding into the water like a wound that was finally closing. Josephine came out. She sat beside him. She did not ask who had texted. She just sat, her shoulder against his, her breath steady in the cooling air. "Tomorrow," she said, "I want to walk on the beach." "All right. I want to collect shells. I want to find one that's perfect. I want to put it on the windowsill." "All right." She leaned her head against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. They sat like that, 2 old people on a porch, watching the sun go down on the first day of the rest of their lives. The phone stayed dark. The text message stayed unread. The ocean kept breathing in and out, like a heart that had never stopped. The next morning, Bernard found the envelope. It was in the pocket of his coat, the one he had worn to the county assessor's office. He had forgotten it was there. He pulled it out, the paper soft and yellow, the ink faded but still legible. The receipt for Lot 17 Pine Ridge Road. The proof that he had owned something he had forgotten, and that forgetting had saved him. He held it for a long moment. Then he folded it carefully along the creases that had already been worn soft, and he put it in the drawer of the nightstand beside the bed. He did not know why he kept it. He did not know if he would ever look at it again. He did not know if it was a reminder of what he had lost or what he had found, but he kept it. In the kitchen, Josephine was making coffee. The smell drifted through the cottage, warm and familiar and ordinary. The pear tree was full of blossoms. The sun was coming up over the water. Bernard closed the drawer. He went to the kitchen. He poured himself a cup of coffee. He sat down at the small table by the window, where the light was good, and he watched his wife move through the morning, slow and steady, the way she had always moved, the way she would always move, until the end of whatever time they had left. The shell was on the windowsill. She had found it on the beach just after sunrise, and she had brought it back in her pocket, still damp, still smelling of salt. It was small and white and unbroken, and it held the way that made him think of something he could not name. He picked it up. He turned it over. It was warm from the sun. He set it back on the windowsill. He did not know what came next. He did not know if David would get better, or if the money would last, or if the cottage would feel like home in the winter, when the storms came in off the water and the windows rattled in their frames. But he knew this. He was here. He was alive. The coffee was hot. The woman he loved was in the next room, and somewhere, in a drawer he would open again someday, there was a piece of paper that proved he had survived something he had not known he was strong enough to survive. The sun rose. The day began, and Bernard Holloway, for the first time in a very long time, was not afraid of what it would bring.